Oh my gosh. So, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to this illustrious panel that will be discussing implementing the safe and circular economy design into the cannabis industry. I'm going to just introduce Howie Fenley from Avocado Sustainability Advisors, who will be serving as your moderator. Howie will introduce his panel colleagues, and I am out of here until you guys are done. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm stoked to listen. Thanks, guys.
All
Howie, take it
right.
away. Sorry.
Hey, am I on?
You're on,
All
man.
right. Hey, everybody. Thanks, Ben, so much for the intro. I am thrilled to be here. I am a noob into this industry, at least from the business perspective. I'm located in Charlottesville, Virginia, and my name is Howie Finley. I'm the co-founder of Avocado Sustainability Advisors here in Charlottesville on the East Coast, where we are only to the point of decriminalization. So I'm learning a lot. I've learned a lot about the industry over the last few days. So first of all, Ben and group, thanks for putting this great event on virtually. It's been great. I'm also joined here by a couple of my esteemed new friends that I'll introduce briefly, and then they will, of course, get more into the details. I've got Kate Christian, who is the corporate sustainability manager at EcoCycle. She's got a lot of great stuff to talk about logistics and moving materials and recycling and recovery and all that stuff. And then we have Jackie Riccio, I think I said it right, Jackie, who is the executive director for the Cannabis for Conservation group out in Humboldt, I think, if I'm remembering correct. So that's us. I'm going to briefly talk about what the circular economy means to me, coming from 20 years in sustainability consulting, but none of which was in agriculture or cannabis. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of what the circular economy means in more traditional industries and how the opportunities are presenting themselves. Almost every person I talk to in this industry seems to be really keen to continuously improve their footprint and their impact of and profile related to sustainability. And of course, everybody wants to make a profit. So we're going to cover the circular economy and sort of the idea of what that is from a theory perspective, and then what it means for business in the cannabis industry and its, whether it's cultivators, whether it's packaging manufacturers, whether it's retailers. There's all of the parts of this industry can work together and create something of value and something good for the planet. So that said, just briefly about me, I spent 2001 until 2019 working for a gentleman named William McDonough, who's an architect, a designer, East Coast person, actually based here in Charlottesville now. He's an architect that was really focused on building buildings, but also making sure that we were building buildings the correct way and we were building them out of the right materials to, for this idea of wellness. Things should be designed with the intent of making the world better, as well as making a profit and promoting sustainable and sort of eco-effective technologies. So for 19 years, I worked for him, traveled the world, saw lots of different manufacturing facilities in different parts of India, Pakistan, all over Europe, China, Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore, Indonesia, and California too. I made it all the way to California as well. So that was my background, was really focused on the science behind sustainability and how to create healthier things for the planet. My background is in chemistry. I studied here at Virginia, biochemistry, determined that chemistry could be applied into sustainability, could be applied into everyday thinking. I mean, chemistry is not necessarily just for doctors and not just for people making things. It's also for people that are buying things. And there's a lot to know about chemistry and how materials impact humans in the environment. So I spent many years doing that until in 2005, I was one of the authors of the version 1 of the Cradle to Cradle certification program for products, which to this day has really driven, helping write that initial publicly available, peer-reviewed study was very taxing, but it was also one of the most meaningful things because it really made me think about what is sustainability. Is really sustainability the right word? Probably not, but most people know kind of what it means. And so I think it's okay to still say we're working on being sustainable. We'd really like to work on becoming 100% good, not just sustainable, right? We'd like to, create nutrients and help economies flourish. That's the kind of thinking that I think industries like cannabis could really benefit for. So while we say sustainability, let's really think about sort of continuous improvement in all things that we do that benefits humans and the bottom line and the planet, of course. So the Cradle to Cradle certification program had 5 pillars: material health, design for circular economy, renewable energy and carbon management, water stewardship, and social fairness. So those 5 pillars were the basis of which we created the certification program. Now, 15 years ago it started, so now it's been 15 years now that certification program has really blossomed into the built environment, into personal care, so formulated products, things like carpeting, paints, anything that would impact indoor air quality or anything that would impact sort of consumer exposure. The products really have, the companies that make those products have really started becoming, gravitating toward that certification. So the good news is that those 5 criteria are clearly resonating in traditional markets. And there's, from what I've heard and what I've read and just knowing what I know about the cannabis industry, there's so many opportunities and options that we could pursue to help companies make money while also saving the planet and promoting wellness in humans. So I think, and then of course the social fairness issue is I've heard a lot about, I've learned a lot about, when I think of social fairness, I usually think about the supply chain of materials. Where are you sourcing your materials? What are your labor practices? But there's also a lot more socioeconomic and there's a lot more sort of racial and gender specific issues that are really relevant in cannabis industry. That's something that I've learned a lot about over the last 3 days. So I'm digging into that issue to understand that a little bit more. So how does that apply to cannabis? Well, I think that if we think of the circular economy first as the goal is to try to create materials that are assets versus materials that are liabilities. Assets meaning either financial. There's a market where you could either reuse or recycle or sell material waste into. That's one no-brainer. But also maybe assets. Start thinking about using whether it's biopolymers or cellulosics in packaging. That would be considered compost, right? That it would be an asset to the soil, which I think we all agree is numero uno priority right now, is taking care of our oceans with the plastic waste as well as the soil that is so is so taxed right now. So that said, the next thing that I want to talk about is the design for the circular economy. So once we consider the materials that are safe or healthy, can be reused, recycled, or composted, then we need to make sure that we're using those materials in a way that they are designed for recovery, recycling, and/or composting. Again, packaging is one that comes to mind a lot. I'm not a cultivator. I don't know a lot about all the chemistry of the plant. Which I'm really excited to learn more about, but I do know a lot about packaging, and I do know a lot about polymers and certain substrates that fit well into certain metabolisms. And so I think if we start considering designing all of our packaging for either technical metabolism or technical nutrition, which is what Kate will talk about, taking real, tangible, hard plastic materials or other metals that have a value for reuse and recovery. We got to do that. And then secondly, we also could think of packaging as like an orange, is packaged with its peel, a banana is packaged with its peel. It would be cool to have a cannabis flower packaged in something that comes from the same family, like maybe some kind of hemp or other cellulosic that could actually be garden compostable. Things like that. Clearly, the economics have to make sense for these things, and that's why it's really important that we're having these events. Because once cultivators, once packaging manufacturers, once the bud tenders, everybody who is part of this transaction from farm to consumption, once everyone starts playing with that idea of technical and biological nutrition, designing for the circular economy, then all of a sudden we have a really truly sustainable and beyond sustainable type product, which then would be a really cool story to tell, the people that are still, about the war on drugs, right? It'd be cool to say, actually, this is what's going on. These are the benefits of the cannabis industry. Regenerative processes, I've heard a lot about regeneration. It's been really, and I'm glad, because when someone asks me, one of my friends who just doesn't understand what I'm trying to do, like, what is it that you're trying to do? And I say, look, I'm trying to create a flow of materials that are safe, that are designed, for circularity and recovery. And I'm trying to use regenerative processes when possible. So when I think of regeneration, I'm thinking mostly water, I'm thinking mostly energy. However, I'm sure there are plenty of other types of regeneration that is going on in this process. And I'm sure Jackie, with her expertise, will be able to tell us about. And then the last thing that I want to mention before we get it going with Kate is all of the work that I've done over the years in textiles and fashion and formulated products, carpeting, all that stuff. Every single project has been successful because it was the economics of everything, the business value of all of the proposed implementations that our company did. They were based, first of all, is it financially viable, and is it something that a shareholder or or even a customer will have a problem paying a little bit extra, or so it really comes down to figuring out the economics first, and then figuring out, once we have the economics figured out, then we figure out the most efficient and effective technologies to implement within the cannabis market. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over to Kate Christian from EcoCycle. And one other thing before I do, and so Jackie reminded me, thank you, Jackie. We are going to take questions during the talk, and we will, at the end of the speaker's time to speak, we will address some of those questions at that time. And then if we don't get to all the questions at the end, we should have a little extra time to cover. So please type in any questions to the thing on the side, and I will keep track of those and make sure everyone is getting questions. People that have questions for me, I will pick those up after Jackie's done talking. So Kate.
Awesome. Thanks, Howie. So as Howie said, my name is Kate Christian. I'm the Corporate Sustainability Manager at EcoCycle. I'm going to talk a lot about recycling and give you kind of a crash course on what it is, why it's important, and how that plays into circularity. So EcoCycle brought recycling to Colorado in 1976, launching one of the first of 20 curbside recycling programs in the US. We were started by volunteers, and we're still driven by passionate people in the community trying to make change. But for 44 years, we've been engaging people and businesses through recycling and zero waste to create larger community change. We're a social enterprise, so we innovate, implement, advocate, all for local and global zero waste solutions to foster a more regenerative, equitable, climate resilient future. And we're doing this through a ton of different programs. We work in schools, we run campaigns, we work with businesses, we have a fleet of trucks hauling recycling and compost. We run a center for hard to recycle materials. So we've come a really long way from being a bunch of hippies with an old school bus collecting recyclables. And I don't think I mentioned that bus didn't have doors. So suffice it to say, we kind of know our stuff when it comes to recycling. So recycling is one of the most effective ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because it works 3 ways. First, recycling reduces energy use. So this energy comes from fossil fuels, which creates carbon pollution. And when you recycle your aluminum can, we can use your can to make a new batch of aluminum cans. That is actual recycling. With that one can, that can create enough energy to power a TV for 3 hours. So one can makes a difference, right? The energy savings from recycling has the biggest impact on reducing GHG emissions. Secondly, recycling and composting also reduces greenhouse gas emissions from landfills. So when we throw away biodegradable materials like paper, food, grass clippings, these materials emit methane, right? So that's a greenhouse gas that in the short term is 84 times more potent than CO2. And then third, I have a leaf blower in the background, so I apologize. Hopefully they're composting their clippings. Third, composting has the potential to not just reduce what we're putting up into the atmosphere, but to actually decrease the amount of climate pollution in our atmosphere. We can literally pull carbon out of the atmosphere and store it in the soil, which means we can reverse the damage that we've already done by decreasing CO2 levels. So I love this. We're often told that a product is recyclable by manufacturers, right? It's a fundamental misunderstanding about what makes an item recyclable. The manufacturer does not determine it, even if they put a really cute symbol on there. They don't get to make that call. There has to be someone to buy the material to use it, to make new products. Usually the same industry that created it, right? And that market is regionally accessible because, you know, let's face it, transportation's pretty expensive. The sale of the material also has to cover the cost of collecting and sorting and transporting the materials. Recycling centers, recycling facilities have to actually exist in that area and be able to take that material, pull it out, and process it. And then finally, to make something recyclable, consumers have to have convenient programs to recycle, meaning at least 60% of communities have to have access to recycling that material. Recently, a lot of people have been asking if your material is actually being recycled. I think I'm probably sugarcoating that. We're actually being asked if recycling's dead, which is not great. One reason that people are asking this is because China has essentially closed its doors to all of the recyclables coming from the US and Europe. Though EcoCycle specifically wasn't dependent on China's recycling markets, many recyclers were sending significant quantities to China. So a third of US recyclables were headed to China at that point. So when they stopped buying imported recyclables, it caused recyclers to look for domestic markets, which is great, but it also caused a massive supply and a subsequent price drop. While this clearly has created significant hardships, I'd say, for recyclers, China's refusal to buy our recyclables is ultimately a good thing. It kind of lifted the veil from some of the more, shall we say, dubious recycling practices and forced us to look for real markets and real answers. We need to focus on recovering our own discards, not discord. Well, we should probably work on discords too, I guess, here in our own nation, rather than shipping them overseas by investing in infrastructure to recover our materials. And we're starting to have an important conversation, right? Recycling is, of course, not the only answer. We need to redesign products and packaging and our entire linear system of consumption, from design to dump, to design for using fewer resources and for products and packaging to be recovered at the end of their useful lives, right? We also need to look at who's going to pay for recycling. Recycling isn't going to work if the onus is on the community and the consumer. Manufacturers need to commit to buying back material from their own products to create market demand, right? Recycling isn't magic. It only works when the industry buys back their product for remanufacture. Recycling is also, like, if you're going to take anything away, recycling is not dead. Take that with you. It's still the #1 easiest thing we can do for the environment. It reduces pollution, helps battle climate change, reduces energy use, reduces water contamination, and overall conserves resources. It is the foundation of your sustainability efforts and a gateway to future actions. Often out of crisis comes opportunity, and this time it's no different. In fact, recycling was never supposed to be the final answer for any of this. We just got stuck along the way. This is the opportunity to understand that recycling isn't the entire picture. We have to go beyond recycling to zero waste and a circular economy. And when we talk about zero waste and the creation of a circular economy, and the leaf blower's back, sorry about that. What we see at the curb is only a tiny fraction of the problem that our environment is being impacted by. So for every 1 bag of trash we have at the curb, in the US, the equivalent to at least 71 bags of discarded material is created upstream before we even see the product in the extraction of natural resources and the manufacturing process. That kind of consumption is clearly unsustainable. If everyone lived as wastefully as Americans do, we would need 5 planets to keep up with our consumption. And the rate of consumption is at a tremendous impact to our planet. According to the US EPA, 42% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from our stuff, our food, and the way we extract, produce, distribute, and discard it. We need to improve recycling, but we also need to redesign products to minimize resource use and for recovery. And we need to innovate the way we look at that redesign. We can create this new circular economy the same way we've created a recycling economy, by working with each sector in every community where we each play our unique roles. Though my title is Corporate Sustainability Manager, I often joke that I'm really a waste therapist. I work with businesses that want to be leaders in sustainability and help their industry as a whole tackle these bigger questions. Like, gone are the days where you have to do sustainability alone. There's a number of industries that are self-selecting as leaders to make that move to a zero waste economy. Those that I'm working with often fit into at least one of the following industries. So natural food, including natural pet care, breweries and distilleries, outdoor retail and exploration, and, you know, the cannabis industry. You guys are groovy folks, so I'm including you on this list. If any industry was able to come together to move the needle toward a more circular economy, it's you guys. One great way to start as far as packaging is concerned is to talk to your local recycler. We love getting questions about waste reduction, innovation, waste flows, and the end of life for your products and packaging. We're really fun at parties, like real fun. Diving into recycling bins and garbage cans to pull things out, to tell you fun facts. I just threw a lot of information at y'all, and I could go on for hours.
I've got a question for you, Kate, because
yes,
it's just based on what you just said. Just kind of, can you talk about what materials? Are there certain materials that, I mean, I know from my experience, maybe polyolefins or polyester, and it would be cool also to start. And this is a job I have to do, is start figuring out the main waste streams coming from the cannabis industry from all the phases, and then figure out how to match that to what are the best materials, the ones that give the best yield or that have the highest market value. Do you have some insight on that?
Yeah, so with recyclability, one of the things that we focus on is whether something's being downcycled or it's, you know, bottle to bottle or something like that. So the materials that we're really excited about are, you know, aluminum. A lot of the in extraction is where a lot of the resource cost comes in. So because aluminum is endlessly recyclable, it's really important that aluminum can goes into the recycling. So that mining of the bauxite that created the aluminum can isn't just for one-time use. You don't want to have a single-use aluminum can. You want to keep that in circulation. Same thing with stainless steel. If you think back on like the roots of recycling, think about things like think about the Great Depression and the big scrap metal drives, right? It's kind of how this all started. So the same materials back then that were being created kind of they've stood the test of time, I'd say. So aluminum, stainless steel, glass is great. Here in Colorado, we have a great end market. So at the Boulder County Recycling Center, You grind up your glass, ship it on a train, and it goes maybe 15 miles down the road to Momentum Glass, gets melted down, then it goes to Rocky Mountain Bottling. 6 weeks later, that glass bottle that you recycled, you could be drinking out of another bottle that has a portion of that glass. So local end markets are really important since glass is heavy.
Yeah, that's great. And are there any plastics that that are maybe ubiquitous enough in general that could be fed, whether it's polyester, like from bottles, or I don't know, maybe HDPE? Are there, when it comes to, because there are there are quite a bit of petro-based polymers being used, even just to ship around seeds or items, right? And so
yeah.
Are there any polymers? I mean, I know the metals that you mentioned are fantastic.
I'm always going to go with metals and glass before I even touch on.
I hear you. No problem.
Yeah, HDPE is good. I think there are things that you want to ask yourself if you're using plastics, which recyclers are actually going to be able to take this. So those cool little vials that like a joint will come in, those are technically-ish recyclable, depending, because it's more the size that matters versus the material in a recycling system. Because it's smaller on the one end, it can drop right in and actually get sorted with our glass before it gets to the plastic sort. So HDPE, yeah, we'll totally take it, goes right into one of our hoppers filled with other HDPE materials once it goes through our laser sorter, which is real cool. Shameless plug, if anybody ever wants to tour when we're not social distancing, come see me. Something to consider with plastics is the color of the plastic. So if you think of Tide, I think they still make those bright orange bottles, right? That, if it goes in with a bunch of white bottles, we don't want that, because that bright orange bottle does the same thing similarly with like a red sock and a white load of laundry, right? So we want white, we want clear. Those are easier to recycle and to sell. Black, red, these bright colors are saturated with color that then contaminate the rest of the plastic. So HDPE, yeah, sure, that's good, but I have 100 other questions along with it to say whether or not it's actually a good choice.
Makes sense. Thank you, Kate. No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, really, and before we get to Jackie, so the whole idea of the whole notion of the circular economy depends on the logistics piece. It depends on getting materials that have a significant concentration in a location that is close to a place that can process that into something that can be sold, right? So the logistics of moving materials is huge. And my thought is, my hope is that maybe cannabis has a quantity of something that, in such great numbers that it can move the needle in a new market, maybe, for recovery and recycling, and create some other businesses out there that are willing and able and ready to process those kinds of unique materials. So anyway, that's, as a chemist, that's where my brain goes. But yeah, thank you, Kate. That's fantastic. So now, so Jackie is going to talk about.
I actually have a question for Kate.
Oh, good. Sorry, Jackie.
Yeah. So Kate, when I'm hearing you talk about recycling and everything, my mind immediately goes to dispensaries and sustainable packaging. And of course, there's different laws in each state, and even in each county, there's different ordinances about what type of packaging you can have. Some places require childproof containers, or some require your container to be sealed while it's in a vehicle, etc. So how do you see, I mean, to me, it seems like the true pathway forward to addressing this issue in the cannabis industry would be for people to be able to bring in their own containers in kind of a bulk sense, and, purchase their cannabis and bring it home in their own container and reuse that same container. But in light of laws and regulations and whatnot, how do you see a pathway forward, given the circumstances?
Good question. I think it's going to catch up. We're going to be able to do that. But look at the pandemic right now. I know everybody's tired of hearing about it, but you used to be able to go into a coffee shop and have your travel mug filled up with coffee. Well, that's no longer happening in most places. So what we need to look at are some more systemic answers. So there's a company that I think is super groovy. It's called Vessel. They have stainless steel cups that have a QR code on the bottom. You go to your coffee shop, they give you a vessel. You don't pay for it at all. You just scan it out. You have it for a week. You drop it off at a kiosk. It's commercially cleaned, right? Then it goes back to the coffee shop. So you're taking out this different, it's no longer on, say, the coffee shop or the dispensary or whoever to clean that. It's a commercial facility that's handling it. If you put in those kinds of systematic protocols and you have a standard operating procedure that travels that life cycle of that material, I think that is how we have to approach that. It's going to be hard. Cannabis is always fighting that battle, right? But we're seeing that needle moving. I keep talking about needles. I should stop doing that. But if we keep trying to move that needle toward greater sustainability, it's going to happen. It's moving that way for the cannabis industry right now. But I think these larger systems thinking, like food and cannabis go hand in hand, like beer and cannabis. Like these are all things that we have to have regulations about, but some of the same answers for food can be the same answers for cannabis. That's my answer.
Great, thanks, Kate.
Of course.
Okay, all right, Jackie. Sorry, that was a great question. I'm glad you asked that. I think so, Jackie. Let's turn it over to you for a bit. So Jackie's going to talk about on the ground. What does the circular economy look like in the biological cycle on the ground in the farm? How is it really? I mean, and it's great because really we're taking this idea from nature. The idea of circularity, we didn't invent it, nature did. So it'll be good to hear from Jackie, who lives that. So thanks, Jackie.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm just gonna thank you, Howie. I'm just gonna give a short little background on me. So as you said, my name is Jackie Riccio. I'm the executive director of Cannabis for Conservation. We are a 501c3 environmental nonprofit located in Humboldt County, California, which is kind of the birthplace of the cannabis industry in the US, if you will. So my background, I was formally educated as a biologist and a wildlife conservationist, and my work preceding this was in that field. And so living in Humboldt, it just kind of naturally melded with cannabis and the culture there. So our organization, CFC, is all about creating conservation programs for farms and educating communities so that we don't have any further ecological harm from unsustainable cultivation. And we're working on a number of different conservation programs right now that are going to do just that. But back to circularity. So when we're talking about circularity on farms, we're really talking about two different things. The first of which is regenerative agriculture, and the second of which is wildlife and land management. And those two things together comprise what I would term an ecosystem approach. So when you take an ecosystem approach and not just a sustainable approach to cultivation, you're mimicking nature. You're doing all these natural processes, and that's really the only way to truly sequester carbon and to have a completely circular farm. So you want to do what nature naturally does, as Howie said, we didn't invent circularity, nature did. So let's go into that first part of a circular approach on farms, which is obviously regenerative agriculture. So I'm sure most of you know what regenerative agriculture is, but let's just dive into a definition anyway. So when we're talking about regenerative ag, the entire purpose is to rebuild soil organic matter, okay, SOM. So SOM is basically plant tissues and plant and animal tissues, fecal material like vermicompost, worm poop. And it's also all of the living microbes and fungi that are in the soil. It's what makes up that living soil, okay? And the other part of regenerative agriculture is sequestering carbon. And the way that you do that is through rebuilding soil organic matter and reversing climate change. So in order to get that soil organic matter to sequester carbon, you have to have mycorrhizal relationships, which are fungal relationships with the plant. They're symbiotic relationships where there's this transfer of essential elements and nutrients between the plants and the mycorrhiza. So the way that carbon sequestration actually can work on your farm is when your plants are photosynthesizing, they're taking in CO2 and sunlight, right? And then they're converting that to glucose, water, and oxygen. So part of the carbon that's taken in is actually, it's a little bit less than half, about half is actually put into the root mass. Of course, it's dependent on how big the roots are, but, it basically goes into half of it goes into the root mass. And then through that root mass, through the roots, the mycorrhizal relationships with the roots, there's a transfer of carbon. So the plants will transfer the carbon to the mycorrhiza, and the mycorrhiza in turn will transfer these often kind of limiting nutrients like phosphorus back to the plant. And so there's that mutualistic relationship there. So what's really cool is like people think that carbon is actually, sequestered in kind of the dirt, if you will, but it's not. It's in the living biotic community in the soil. And it's an entire community ecosystem thing going on down there. So that's what we're trying to replicate. And part of rebuilding soil organic matter is I shouldn't say part of it. The whole thing is kind of these 5 different principles, which first of all, you can't do any tillage, no tillage. It just completely disrupts soil organic matter, and it messes up the carbon cycle. So you don't want to do that if you're trying to enhance nutrient cycling naturally on your farm. Second thing is you want to have a diversity of plants, biodiversity, right? So it's one of the basics of an ecosystem. You want to enhance that. You want to give your farm that immunological diversity naturally. And you also want to have continuous plant roots in the ground all the time. You never want to have bare soil. It contributes to erosion. It messes up the humic acid. It messes up the natural decomposition that's happening in your living soil. And then you also want to integrate animals. That's critical. Anytime, a lot of times, sustainable approaches, they leave out wildlife or animals, and that's not what ecosystems are. They're plants and animals and microbes. So you have to have that animal integration, otherwise the whole system doesn't work. And that's really what our organization is working to emphasize. So, we're trying to get into that wildlife enhancement aspect of regenerative agriculture. So let's dive into that. So the second point there from the ecosystem approach, right, is land and wildlife management. And so what that means is you have to do practices on your property. This isn't just about your cultivation area. This isn't just about your cultivation practices. This is about your property, the whole thing, the whole shebang. You have to look at it like it's an ecosystem. So when we're talking about, wildlife management, for example, there's a number of different things that you can do to naturally enhance the native species that are already occupying your land and leverage what they're already doing to help with the carbon cycle and nitrogen cycle and other natural processes that are happening. An example of that would be, putting up bat houses or bird houses on your property to provide habitat for them. Removal of invasive species. Invasive species are awful. They displace native plants. They mess up the natural succession process of plants. You don't want them. So get rid of them. Like up here, we've got pampas grass. We've got invasive Himalayan blackberry. I've just had someone come out the other day to my property and remove a ton of it because it just colonizes. If you don't manage it, it gets overwhelming and it will outcompete the native species that are on your land. So you got to do that. Another thing that you can do is restoration. So a lot of people have streams or natural bodies of water on their property, and you can restore those places with different types of wetland plants and riparian plants. And all these things I'm saying, they can be overwhelming because you're like, where do I begin? And the best thing that you can do is reach out to your local resources, okay, in your community, okay, local plant nurseries, native plant nurseries. Reach out to your local fish and game board, or here it's called California Department of Fish and Wildlife, but whatever that is in your area. reach out to them. They want people to do conservation. So there's lots of free tools. This doesn't have to be expensive. You don't have to spend an exorbitant amount of money to manage your land, to enhance natural wildlife populations and help them redistribute on their natural range, help their declining populations. And it all contributes back to that carbon cycle, back to sequestering carbon. I'll give you an example. Okay, so in South Texas, there's a bunch of cotton farms, and these researchers went down there and did a study on these Brazilian free-tailed bats that are living in a massive cave in South Texas. They found that on 3 different farms, these bats saved these farmers $750,000 in pesticides annually in 1 year. And bats globally save farmers anywhere between, it's somewhere in the range of $5 to $50 billion, billion with a B, okay, a year in pesticides. So they pack a punch. They eat those insects up, and those insects are going to be what's destroying your plants. You can mimic this on your property. Get a couple bat boxes. They'll take care of moths that, are caterpillars that will destroy your cannabis plants. And those bats are, producing tons of guano, okay, which is adding back to that soil organic matter, okay, which is then turning the carbon cycle. So you can see how it all relates. And of course, I'm always here as a resource as well. My organization, like I said, we're a nonprofit. And so we are happy to help anybody who's interested in learning how to do this on their property. And of course, you can participate in our conservation programs as well. So I went on for a long time there. So feel free to butt in if you want to, if you want me to elaborate on something. Or...
Jackie, hey, we got a question from Raju Bhatt, I think is the name. The question is, any traction with your state legislators in helping with regulations?
Any traction, meaning, I guess I'm taking that to mean if you're participating in conservation programs, are there any kickbacks from regulators? The answer to that is no, not at the moment, unfortunately. But at this point in the game, folks, there's no room for let's wait for some monetary kickback. Try to eat your money. You can't. We have to start doing these things now. You have to take control of your property, do it on your land, regardless of whether you're going to get a kickback from regulators. And you got to let consumers vote with their dollars, right? So you got to get certifications. You got to advertise the fact that you're part of conservation programs. Let your dispensary know, let your distributors know, and have your product, really highlighted that you're doing this. Let the people know that are buying your product, and they're going to start, buying your product more. So that's what I have to say to that. I do work with regulators that are in charge of some of the cannabis regulations in California. Our programs are not swaying those regulations in any means, but we do work with regulators.
Okay.
I'd love to kind of tack on something to that too, Jackie.
Yeah.
I love that about, you can't just wait for the kickbacks and things like that. This is your property. This is your responsibility in essence. And I've heard more and more recently that folks are consistently looking, what's the cost savings of sustainability? It's like, sometimes, and you're not gonna like the answer, there aren't really any, depending on how you're approaching it. Doesn't mean it's not the right thing. And exactly to what you said, telling the story is hugely important. Getting that story out there and explaining what you're doing, that's gonna bring you so many new customers too. It's invaluable.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when we're talking about, it's a very short-term investment to think about money in that way. You want to contribute to saving our planet, you need to do these things. That's the bottom line, right? If we want to think about our generations ahead of us, okay, we need to take this indigenous approach. Indigenous people have been talking about this for a very long time, 7 generations ahead. And that's how we need to think. It's not often that this world, we get to see an industry open up like cannabis. It's burgeoning. It's just beginning. And we have a real opportunity and a real responsibility, I think, to become a model industry for other industries to follow. I don't think we need to wait on the money.
100% agree.
Yeah. Howie, anything else on the circular economy in Canada?
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to talk about that hasn't been brought up yet, the importance of safety first too, because so circular economy, some people say circular economy, Ellen MacArthur coined the term, made a really good, is making a good living off of of capturing the circular economy. But one thing that often gets overlooked is that we first should make sure that what we are putting into the world before it gets used and recycled or composted is safe. And so one thing that has become much more visible in other markets is this idea of transparency by the manufacturer, transparency by the wholesaler, transparency by the retailer about what it is that's in the product that they're selling, and instead of maybe just listing a bunch of chemicals like you see now, like say on the back of a shampoo, like, yeah, we're being transparent. We listed all of the ingredients on the back. Well, what they do is they list very technical chemicals, and then they'll have an entry for perfume. A perfume, in my experience, a fragrance formula typically has between 75 and 150 unique chemicals in that. So they're not being transparent. They're just basically listing stuff that has no meaning to any consumer, right? Instead, I believe that there needs to be, and I attended the certification one earlier with Ben and there's some other folks that were on that panel that was great about the certifications and what does it mean and how do we create one that means something to the general consumer. One thing we found in fashion, and the big challenge in the fashion industry in the circular economy, is the notion of fast fashion, and things are out of style, particularly in certain parts of the world, that you wear it and then it's gone, then you give it away or something, but eventually it's destined for landfill or the incinerator. And so one thing that's really helped in that industry is the identification of cradle to cradle, which there's a lot of great certifications out there, but the cradle to cradle one has been adopted by a few brands now, and it's starting to get more traction, so that people recognize cradle to cradle is it's a mark of quality. It's fully, all the ingredients have been disclosed, but they've been disclosed to a trusted chemist or toxicological organization that performs the assessment, gives a meaningful and third-party assessment of the health for humans and the health for the planet of all the ingredients that are in there. And then the brand, so Johnson & Johnson doesn't have to list their proprietary formulation on the back, but if they go through the proper channels, have third-party verification and truly scientific assessment, then there's all of a sudden a person can go into the store and say, oh, well, first of all, I'm glad this is safe. It's been tested. We have a very, a trusted source. And then how that contributes to the circular economy, well, then we know that the fact that it's been proven or shown to be safe means that you can safely go down the drain, because those ingredients have been vetted for their biodegradation potential, what the metabolites are when it gets into the ground, into the wastewater. So there's the safety first, then we cycle it, whether it's compost or in the event, the circumstance, Kate, that you mentioned with the Tide bottle. Yeah, I know that formula. So the orange Tide bottle has a pigment, or actually 2 or 3 pigments that give it that really bright color. It's got lots of chlorine, organochlorine, and organobromine as part of the pigment formulation. So the manufacturer of that bottle is going to say, oh, well, yeah, it's one ingredient is orange color. Well, that orange color actually is highly toxic if it's burned or buried, which without the logistics there to recover it and get it to a facility, that's going to be the destination. So those Tide bottles haven't been vetted for their safety. If they had been, the chlorinated pigments wouldn't be used, right? You don't want that stuff, and maybe you have a slightly different color orange. No, so what, right? It's a safer material. So I think the idea of let's get everything safe first, then circular is really, I think it's sort of a take-home message from this.
I think, Howie, I'm right there with you on all of that. And look, I think on the recycling end of things, one of the challenges we're seeing is that folks are innovating so incredibly quickly, which is amazing. However, that line from Jurassic Park, like you were so quick to figure out if you could, you didn't stop to think if you should. We're now starting to put plastic wrap outside of our aluminum cans. It's causing combustion, right. Like combustion in the smelting plants. It's really dangerous. So it's really important to fully flesh everything out from whether it's safe in a toxicity standpoint, but also is it safe from a material collection and processing standpoint?
Absolutely.
And also, Jackie, is this something that's going to be breaking down because it's been labeled biodegradable and it's a plastic? So it's actually going into our soil shed if it's not being properly disposed of.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of things that are biodegradable, they're not immediately biodegradable. It still takes a long time. They're more degradable than the alternative. But I really think, as close to the natural state of a product as you can get is the best. I loved what Howie had said earlier about, some cannabis packaging needing to be, made out of hemp, made out of the plant itself. It's hemp is this beautiful, magical plant. It's cannabis, it's all cannabis. But, I think looking into options, just as he's been talking about that, it is really going to be critical as we move forward and as the industry moves forward.
Hey, and Jackie, one thing about that, you triggered something. You're exactly right. And biodegradable is not the same as compostable.
No.
So I think meaning this industry, we need to start understanding what it is that we're asking for. I mean, yeah, if you're asking for something biodegradable, there are those oxo-degradable trash bags, which have extremely toxic additive put in them that makes the polymer appear to break down, but in essence, it's toxifying the soil. So, that's not compostable. That's a biodegradable system but it's made biodegradable by adding a toxic chemical. It's a heavy metal. I think it may be, I don't know if it's boron or bismuth, or there's some type of additive that they use for that oxo-degradable technology. And it's basically the worst thing you could do, because instead of having something that's inert, you're having something that's toxic that actually is being introduced into the soil. So yeah, one thing that my old boss, Bill McDonough, he said, I remember it was the first year I worked for him, and it's always stuck with me. He's like, remember, design is the first signal of human intention, right? So when you design something, you need to design it with a positive intent. And if your intent is to make as much crap as you can and get it out there for the highest margin, okay, but that is certainly not the route that we need to be going. Instead, if we're intending to create an asset, materials that are assets, either biologically or technically, if we think of that at the beginning, it becomes much easier to have something that's actually valuable for multiple iterations.
Hey guys, it's Ben Gelt back on here. I've been listening in and kind of waiting for a good moment to interject. We are coming up to the bottom of the hour. You guys are slated to end here at 2:25 Denver time. I keep trying to say only the minutes and not
just so you know, in my time, we just passed by 4:20.
I know that, and I'm sure some other people on the Eastern time zone noticed that as well. So my producers have been telling me all week that getting out a little early is preferable to a little late. So they told me to come on in. So here I am. A little bit of housekeeping. First, before I do that, my apologies. Howie and Kate and Jackie, thank you so much again. This was really an enlightening conversation, no surprise, and at least from my point of view, and hopefully the audience, well worth the wait. Certainly for the recording, it will be incidental for future audience. So really just huge thank you to each of you, all the work that you do every day and coming and sharing it with us here today, and even being so gracious to share it potentially twice in a week. So thank you for making time twice for us. And Jackie, you are one of the very, very few folks that participated on 2 panels. So big thank you to you for all of your participation and engagement.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's been such an honor. I've loved connecting with everybody. So thank you so much.
It's so
Ben,
much.
I just wanted to say thanks for hooking me up and getting me involved early in my venture into this industry. This has been a great week so far for me. I've learned a ton. So thank you for just letting me get involved.
It's great. And, of the 3 of you, really, Jackie is the only one that is a cannabis person. And that's a big part of what we've done here from the beginning, is pull in experts from other places to share. We have a lot of cannabis knowledge within our ranks, but there's a huge deficit and a huge amount of stuff to know from out there in the world. So, listening to you all talk, it made me think quite a bit about what Tom Zakey said this morning. I don't know if you guys were able to catch his keynote this morning. It was just fantastic. So just to get us out of here, we do have the closing session starting in about 5 minutes at the bottom of the hour. It will be brief. You're going to see my face again, and I'm just going to kind of recap and plug that you come on back tomorrow for the final day of this 5th annual Cannabis Sustainability Symposium. By far the most content we've ever done, the most days, the most speakers, big crowds. I mean, we've had hundreds of attendees rolling through the course of the day. Each panel kind of ebbs and flows. And of course, we are recording all of this. So we will be making all of this content available to ticket holders, to speakers, to registrants, and then also to subscribers. So we're very excited about that. That's also something we haven't always been able to do in the past, because when we have live events and there's 3 or 4 tracks and ballrooms, we're a small nonprofit. We don't have the budget to have cameras and audio in every room. So that's been another one of these silver linings with going virtual, is just being able to capture all of this amazing content. So with that, I'm going to get out of here so my producers don't yell at me. To the panel, thank you again. To the audience, thank you for your patience and for being awesome. Brandon Rea, you are the friggin' man. Thank you. Just looking at the comment. And yeah, hopefully I'll see everybody in just a few minutes. We'll just chat quickly about the day and talk about tomorrow, and then we'll be out of here. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our audience, and thank you to our producers for cutting me off. See you guys.